Welcome to this video about one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, terrorized Southern California during the mid-1980s with a string of heinous crimes that included murder, rape, and burglary. His crimes were particularly brutal and gruesome, earning him a reputation as one of the most dangerous and violent criminals of his time. In this video, we'll delve into the life and crimes of the Night Stalker, exploring the circumstances that led him to become a notorious serial killer, as well as the methods he used to evade capture for so long. We'll also examine the impact that the Night Stalker had on the communities he targeted, and how his legacy continues to haunt those who were affected by his crimes. So sit back, and join us as we explore the dark and twisted world of the Night Stalker. The life of Richard Ramirez. Childhood to killing spree. Born in El Paso, Texas on February 29, 1960, Richard Ramirez was the youngest of 5 children to parents Julian and Mercedes Ramirez. His father, a former police officer turned railway laborer, was an alcoholic who frequently physically abused his family. Ramirez began experimenting with drugs and alcohol at a young age, starting at age 10. At the age of 12, Richard was introduced to his older cousin Miguel Ramirez, a decorated Green Beret combat veteran. Little did Richard know that Miguel had become a notorious serial killer, known for his brutal and violent crimes. Miguel taught Richard some of his military skills, including the art of stealth killing and effectively hiding in the dark. Some speculate that this early exposure to such disturbing behavior may have played a role in shaping the actions of the infamous criminal later known as the Night Stalker. When Richard was 13 years old, he witnessed his cousin Mike fatally shoot his wife Jessie. Shockingly, this traumatic event didn't have a negative impact on Richard, but instead sparked a fascination with violence. By the age of 14, Richard started using LSD and became interested in Satanism and the occult, setting the stage for his future as a notorious criminal. After quitting school in 9th grade, Ramirez headed to California and made it his permanent home in 1982 at the age of 22. His drug of choice became cocaine, and he resorted to committing thefts and burglaries to fuel his addiction. Ramirez led a wanderlust life, frequently traveling between San Francisco and Los Angeles County, before finally getting caught and sent to prison. Throughout his crime spree, he kept moving between Northern and Southern California, evading the authorities. The horrifying crimes of Richard Ramirez. In April 1984, Richard Ramirez murdered 9-year-old Mei Leung, a Chinese-American girl, in the basement of his apartment building located in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. Leung was with her 8-year-old brother searching for a lost $1 bill when Ramirez approached her and asked her to follow him to the basement to look for it. Ramirez then physically assaulted and strangled her before stabbing her to death with a switchblade. The murder remained unsolved until 2009 when Ramirez's DNA was matched to a sample obtained at the crime scene. In 2016, authorities disclosed the existence of a second suspect in the murder of Mei Leung. This suspect was identified through DNA obtained from the crime scene and is believed to have been present during the murder. The suspect was described as a juvenile at the time, but authorities have not revealed their identity and have not pressed charges due to insufficient evidence. The investigation into the case remains open. On June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was found dead in her apartment in Glassell Park, Los Angeles. Richard Ramirez's fingerprint was found on a mesh screen he had removed to enter through an open window. This was the second murder attributed to Ramirez, who established a pattern of breaking into homes and committing extremely brutal murders, often robbing his victims. Ramirez's crimes were driven by his cocaine addiction and the need to pay for his rent. In March 1985, Richard Ramirez shot and assaulted Maria Hernandez outside her home in Rosemead, California. Despite being shot in the face with a .22 caliber handgun, Hernandez survived because the bullet ricocheted off the keys she was holding. Her roommate, Dale Yoshi Okazaki, was not as lucky and was shot dead by Ramirez. Ramirez entered the kitchen where Okazaki was hiding and shot her once in the forehead, killing her on the spot. Within an hour, he attacked Tsai Lien Yu in Monterey Park, fatally shooting her. The media dubbed Ramirez with nicknames such as the Walk-in Killer and the Valley Intruder, due to his distinctive appearance. Richard Ramirez committed another home invasion on March 27, 1985, in a Whittier, California home that he had burglarized before. He shot 64-year-old Vincent Charles Zazzara in the head with a .22 caliber handgun and beat and bound his wife, Maxine Lavinia Zazzara, 44, demanding to know where her valuables were. While Ramirez was distracted, Maxine managed to escape and retrieve a shotgun, but it was not loaded. Ramirez then shot her 3 times with a .22 caliber handgun, killing her. The police identified footprints from a pair of Avius sneakers and matched the bullets from the attack to previous ones, leading them to suspect a serial killer was on the loose. On May 14, 1985, Richard Ramirez returned to Monterey Park and broke into the home of Bill Doy, 66, and his disabled wife, Lillian, 56. Ramirez shot Doy in the face with a .22 semi-automatic pistol as Doy went for his own handgun. After beating the mortally wounded man into unconsciousness, Ramirez entered Lillian's bedroom and bound her with thumb cuffs. Bill Doy later died of his injuries in the hospital. On May 29, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of Mabel, Ma, Bell and her sister Florence, Nettie, Lang in Monrovia. He bludgeoned and bound the women with a hammer, then shocked Bell with an electrical cord and drew a satanic pentagram symbol on Lang's thigh and the walls of the bedroom with Bell's lipstick. The women were found 2 days later, comatose and severely injured. Bell passed away from her injuries in the hospital. On the following day after the murder of Mabel Bell, Richard Ramirez sneaked into the house of 42-year-old Carol Kyle in Burbank. He handcuffed Kyle and her 11-year-old son, and searched the house for valuable items. He freed Kyle to show him where the valuables were, but threatened her not to look at him, even threatening to cut out her eyes. Ramirez fled the scene after finding the child in a closet and re-binding them together with the handcuffs. On July 2, 1985, Richard Ramirez entered the home of Mary Louise Cannon, a 75-year-old widowed grandmother in Arcadia. He struck her with a lamp and then used a butcher knife to fatally stab her. On July 5, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into a home in Sierra Madre and attacked 16-year-old Whitney Bennett while she was sleeping in her bedroom. Ramirez used a tire iron to bludgeon her, then searched for a knife in the kitchen but was unsuccessful. He then tried to strangle her with a telephone cord, but was surprised to see electrical sparks coming from the cord. Believing that this was a sign from Jesus Christ, Ramirez fled the scene. Bennett survived the attack, but required 478 stitches to close the lacerations on her scalp. On July 7, 1985, Richard Ramirez attacked and killed 60-year-old Joyce Lucille Nelson in Monterey Park by repeatedly stomping on her face. Later that night, he assaulted and handcuffed 63-year-old Sophie Dickman at gunpoint, attempted to rape her, and stole her jewelry. Ramirez left only after Dickman swore on Satan that she had given him everything valuable in her home. On July 20, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of Leela and Maxon Knighting in Glendale, California. He attacked the couple while they were sleeping with a machete and then fatally shot them in the head with a .22 caliber handgun. Ramirez stole valuable items from their home and then sold the stolen items before fleeing to Sun Valley, California. At approximately 4:15 a.m., Ramirez broke into the Covenant family's home and fatally shot Chainarong Covenant in the head with a .25 caliber handgun. He then viciously beat Somkid Covenant while their 8-year-old son was bound. Ramirez ransacked the house and demanded Somkid to reveal the location of valuable items, forcing her to swear to Satan that she was not hiding any money from him. On August 6, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of Chris and Virginia Peterson in Northridge. He shot Virginia in the face with a .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun, then shot Chris in the neck. Chris fought back, dodging 2 more shots during the struggle, and Ramirez ultimately fled the scene. Though both Chris and Virginia survived their injuries, they were left traumatized by the attack. On August 8, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of Sakina and Elias Abawath in Diamond Bar, California. He shot and killed Elias with a .25 caliber handgun before handcuffing and beating Sakina while forcing her to reveal the locations of the family's jewelry. Ramirez repeatedly demanded that she swear on Satan that she would not scream during his assaults. When the couple's 3-year-old son entered the bedroom, Ramirez tied him up before leaving the home. Sakina was able to untie her son and send him to the neighbors for help after Ramirez fled the scene. Capture and trial. On August 30, 1985, Ramirez boarded a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother but returned to Los Angeles when his brother was not home. As he walked past police officers who were looking for him at the bus terminal, Ramirez entered a convenience store in East Los Angeles where he was identified by a group of elderly women. In a panic, Ramirez attempted to flee the store and was chased by a group of residents who beat him severely. Police were called to the scene and found Ramirez injured and unarmed. He was taken into custody and eventually driven to the Hollenbeck police station with Officer Jim Kaiser. The trial of Richard Ramirez began on July 22, 1988, with the selection of jurors. During his first court appearance, Ramirez raised his hand with a pentagram and shouted, "Hail Satan," in the courtroom. However, his behavior escalated when jail employees overheard him planning to smuggle a gun into the courtroom and shoot the prosecutor. As a result, a metal detector was installed outside the courtroom, and intensive searches were conducted on everyone who entered. The Los Angeles Times reported on August 3, 1988, that this incident had taken place. During the trial of Richard Ramirez, one of the jurors, Phyllis Singletary, failed to show up on August 14. Her body was later found in her apartment, having been shot to death. This event caused panic among the jurors, who feared that Ramirez may have orchestrated the murder from his prison cell and could potentially harm other jurors. However, it was later determined that Singletary's death was not connected to Ramirez, as she was killed by her boyfriend, who later committed suicide with the same weapon in a hotel. The alternate juror who took Singletary's place was too afraid to return to her home. After being put on trial for his crimes, Richard Ramirez was found guilty of all 43 charges against him, including 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. On November 7, 1989, during the penalty phase of the trial, Ramirez was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber. Ramirez's response to the sentence was callous, stating, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." The trial cost $1.8 million, which was the most expensive murder trial in California's history at that time. During his incarceration and trial, Richard Ramirez gained a following of fans who would write him letters and even visit him in prison during his incarceration and trial. One of his most devoted followers was Doreen Leoy, who began writing him letters in 1985 and continued to do so throughout his time in prison. Ramirez proposed to Leoy in 1988, and they were married in San Quentin State Prison in 1996. However, she eventually left him in 2009 after DNA evidence confirmed his involvement in the rape and murder of 9-year-old Mei Leung. At the time of his death in 2013, Ramirez was engaged to a 23-year-old writer. Richard Ramirez died on June 7, 2013, at the age of 53, while on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He had been suffering from complications related to B-cell lymphoma, a type of cancer that affects the immune system. Ramirez had been on death row for more than 23 years, during which time he had been appealing his sentence and claiming his innocence despite overwhelming evidence against him. His death generated significant media attention and public interest, with many people still debating his legacy and the impact of his crimes on the community. Psychopathology and psychopathy. Ramirez had a troubled childhood, growing up in a dysfunctional family with a history of abuse and criminal activity. He was also exposed to drugs and violence at a young age, which likely contributed to the development of his psychopathic tendencies. Ramirez's psychopathy was characterized by a lack of empathy or remorse for his victims, as well as a tendency towards impulsivity and sensation-seeking behavior. He was also known for his charming and charismatic personality, which he used to manipulate his victims and evade capture. In addition to his psychopathy, Ramirez also exhibited signs of severe mental illness. He claimed to have been influenced by Satan and engaged in bizarre behaviors such as drawing pentagrams on his victims' walls. It is believed that he suffered from a form of psychosis, which contributed to his delusional beliefs and violent behavior. Despite the severity of his crimes, Ramirez was found to be legally sane and was ultimately convicted and sentenced to death. His case continues to be studied by psychologists and criminologists in an effort to better understand the nature of psychopathy and the factors that contribute to violent behavior. As we come to the end of this video, we hope that you have gained a deeper understanding of the life and crimes of the Night Stalker. The legacy of Richard Ramirez is one that will always be remembered as one of the most heinous and disturbing in the history of American crime. While the Night Stalker is no longer with us, the impact of his crimes continues to be felt by those who were affected by his horrific acts. It serves as a reminder of the importance of remaining vigilant and aware of the dangers that can lurk in our communities. We thank you for watching, and we hope that this video has shed light on the dark and twisted world of the Night Stalker, and the impact that his crimes have had on society.